To today's business studies lesson. My name is Studeis. This program is funded by the Northern Cape Department of Education, broadcast by Pagama Research and Development. Today we look into a main topic we call the business venture, which is assessed in your paper 2. And the subtopic we look into is forms of ownership. So this is part 1 of our forms of ownership. So we'll be looking into ways in which a business can be owned or controlled when we look into various forms of ownership. Now, let's look into our learning outcomes. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to do the following: discuss or explain the characteristics of each form of ownership. We'll also look into explaining the meaning of limited liability and unlimited liability, together with discussing or explaining or evaluating the impact, which looks into positives or advantages and or negatives or disadvantages of the different forms of ownership. That would be our focus for today's lesson. Pre-knowledge, remember back in grade 10, forms of ownership were introduced to you, whereby we focused largely on what is a sole trader. A sole trader is a business owned by only one person. So this is where the issue of forms of ownership started, because it's important to discuss issues on how the business is going to be owned. Remember, the subject is business studies. Now, baseline, we are having a multiple choice, which is read as following: which form of ownership allows 2 or more people to be owners and share responsibility and the risk of the business? Is it a public company? Is it a private company? Is it a partnership or a share capital? Obviously, thinking about it, to your pre-knowledge, it can never be share capital, because this is not a form of ownership, but it can either be A, B, or C. Now, this form of ownership says now it allows 2 or more people to be owners and share responsibility and risks of the business. Is it a public company or a private company? Remember, when we are talking about companies, we are talking about now shareholders becoming the owners. And now that we are talking about owners, it becomes now the issue of companies is not considered because of that particular idea. So the answer should be partnership, because with partnership, 2 or more people can own and take the risks associated with the particular business, and they will share the responsibility on how to run the business. But remember, with companies now, public and private, they are basically not owned or taken care of by their shareholders, because the shareholders have to vote for a director. Terminology that is important for our lesson is the term form of ownership. Form of ownership refers to the legal position of the business and the way it is owned. Furthermore, we have continuity, which refers to the idea that it can continue to exist even if a change of ownership takes place, e.g. a member or a shareholder dies or retires. That's what we mean with continuity, to say that that particular form of ownership would allow the business to continue to operate regardless of any change in ownership, if maybe a member or a shareholder passes away. Directors, this refers to people elected to the board of a company by the shareholder to represent the shareholders' interests, and an audit refers to the process where an organization's accounts are checked to make sure its financial operations are honest. Then we start with the difference, or we start with the meaning of liability, and with liability, we'll be looking into limited liability together with unlimited liability. So remember, liability refers to the debts of the business, refers to everything that is owed by the business. Either they would be owing banks, they would be owing suppliers. So whatever that is being owed by the business is considered to be a liability. And then we have limited liability and unlimited liability, which is 2 concepts that are very applicable to the forms of ownership and explain the legalities related to the liability, to say, can it be attached to the owner's assets or can it be unattached to the owner's liability? Now, the meaning of limited liability, this is when now shareholders are only liable for the amount they have invested in the company what does the word limit mean? The word limit means it has to end at a particular level. It cannot pass a particular level. It cannot be above a particular level or a particular rate. So it is limited to a particular criteria or standard. So with that, for example, with limited liability, they are saying now this is when shareholders are only liable for the amount they have invested in the company. So if the company has debts, the shareholders are only liable for the amount they have invested. So the shareholders would invest shares to the company, which come in a form of the amount. Let's say, for instance, a shareholder has invested 100,000. So what we mean is that the debts of the business are only limited, or the debts of the shareholder towards the business, they are limited to the 100,000 the shareholder has invested, not more than that. Hence, we talk about the limit. So the limit for a shareholder who has invested 100,000 is limited to that particular 100. It cannot move above that. Hence, in our example, it says now, if a business is bankrupt, meaning the business has debts that are over what the business has or can be able to pay, the personal positions of the shareholders cannot be used to pay the debt of the business. So in a case whereby now the company has 1 million assets, or has 1 million assets, and then it happens that the debts of the business now, they are 2 million. If the debts of the business are 2 million and the assets are 1 million, it means the company now has debts that are over their assets. So it means the company has to now come up with a plan on how they're going to pay off the other 1 million. So what we are saying is that if the company has assets that are worth 1 million, using the picture, and then those are the assets, and then the debts of the business, let's say the debts of the business is 2 million. And then the shareholders, let's say the shareholders now have invested 100,000. And together as the team of shareholders, let's say they have invested. So what we are saying is that these individuals, or these shareholders, their debt or their liability is limited to what they have invested. If one shareholder has invested 100,000, it means that shareholder will not use their personal assets, such as a car, to pay off the debts, because the debts of a business, they are worth 2 million, and the assets of the business worth 1 million. So that is what we mean with limited liability. It cannot be over what the shareholder has invested. But when we are looking into unlimited liability, which is applied to forms of ownership such as the sole trader and the partnership, this is when the owners are personally liable for all the debts of the business. So, for example, in this situation now, which we call unlimited, it means now whatever the business owes is actually being owed by the owner as well. If the business is declared bankrupt, meaning it doesn't have money, the personal positions of the sole trader or partners may be sold off to pay off the debt of the business. So what is being owed by the business is also owed by the owner. If the business fails to pay off their debts, then it means that the debt of the business will be attached to the owner, and if the owner doesn't have money, the owner might end up having to sell their assets to pay off their debt. Now, the focus for our lesson, remember, is the forms of ownership, and remember, limited liability will come in an unlimited liability. Limited meaning the owner's assets will be separated to the debts of the business, but unlimited now saying the owner's assets can also be attached to the debts of the business. So we'll look into a sole trader to say what do we mean by that, and we'll also look into the characteristics. We'll look into partnership, we'll look into close cooperation together with the private company, and personal liability together with the public company. Now, the first part is to define what is a sole trader. A sole trader is a business that is owned and managed by one person. The characteristics of a sole trader is that owners can sell the business to anyone at any time. There are no legal requirements regarding the name of the business. Furthermore, it is easy to establish as there's no legal formalities in forming the business. And another one is that sole traders are not compelled by law to audit financial statements, and the owner has a potential or personal interest in the management and the service that is rendered, together with the idea that the owner has unlimited liability. That is to say, the owner is personally liable for the debts of the business and their assets can be attached. What are the positives there? The advantage is that the owner has freedom to make all decisions, and quick and easy decisions can be made, because remember, this is a sole trader business owned by one person. That the advantage is that easy decisions can be taken and they can be taken quickly. And another advantage is that little capital is needed to start this type of a business or a type of ownership that is legally owned as a sole trader, and all profits will belong to the owner. However, negatives are the idea that there's unlimited liability, which means that the owner is personally liable for all the debts or losses suffered by the business, and the owner is responsible for providing all capital needed, which can be difficult to raise a big amount of money. And then growth of business can be restricted due to lack of capital. Then we look into partnership. What do we mean by that? Partnership. A partnership has two or more partners who own the business. It is an agreement between two or more people who combine labor, capital, and resources towards a common goal, which is to make profit or make the business a success. That is a partnership. And then the characteristics is that partners combine capital and may also borrow capital from financial institutions, and profit is shared according to the partnership agreement, which will be written down. And then partners share responsibility, and they are all involved in decision making, and no legal requirements regarding the name of the business. You can use any name, and no legal formalities to start. Only a written partnership agreement is required. And then partners or partnership has no legal personality, therefore has no continuity. So with the legal personality, this is to say now, a partnership, it cannot operate in isolation of its owners. So if one owner of the partnership passes away, it means it has to be stopped, so that now it can now be operated differently, or the ownership or the partnership agreement can be drafted again. Then the positives is that now the partners are able to put their knowledge and skills together to make collective best decisions, and then the workload and responsibilities shared between partners, and then partners are able to share resources. And then another one is that partners are only required to pay tax in their personal or individual capacity. When we look into negatives, a partnership has unlimited liability, as partners' personal belongings can be sold or used to pay off the debts of the business, and each partner is legally responsible for a joint liability of the partnership. That is a disadvantage now, to say if a partnership as a business fails, some partners might be affected even though they did not contribute to that failure. Hence, they say each partner is legally responsible for the joint liability of the partnership, meaning the liability is joint. If the business fails and the business does not or is not able to pay off the debts of the business, the owners should all contribute towards paying off. And then different partnership, different personalities and opinions of partners can lead to conflict if there is a disagreement, and then partners may not always contribute equally towards the team. Then we have close cooperation. The focus there will be on the characteristics. The characteristics of a close cooperation focuses on the idea that it can have a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 10 members who share a common goal, and then the name must end with the suffix cc to indicate close cooperation, and then profits are shared in proportion to the members' interest in the close cooperation. And then another one, a close cooperation has its own legal personality, therefore it has unlimited continuity, meaning if one member can pass away, then the company or the close cooperation, can continue to operate. Each member makes a contribution of some sort. It can be an asset or a service towards the corporation. And then the word close means that all members are involved and participate in its management. And members have unlimited liability except where the closed corporation has had more than 10 members or for 6 months or longer. Then positives and negatives of the closed corporation. There are few legal requirements, e.g. such as the auditing of financial statements or regular annual general meeting. And a closed corporation is a legal entity and has continuity of existence, and it can be converted to a private company and members may become shareholders. Then negatives is the idea that there is limited growth and expansion, since a closed corporation may only have 10 members. And then when we are looking into another negatives, that a member of a closed corporation can be held personally liable for the losses of the closed corporation if the member acts incompetently, and then audited financial statements may be required when applying for a loan. Then we look into now types of companies. We have profit companies, remember, and non-profit companies. And then we'll be looking into the types of profit companies. One of those is private company, and we also have public together with a state-owned company. Now, when we're looking into a private company, a private company can be formed by an owner who is called a shareholder, and then it can be a small or a large company that has one or more directors. Now, it needs a minimum of one shareholder, and there's no limit on the number of shareholders. It raises capital by issuing shares to its shareholders, and then shareholders have limited liability, and the company name ends with letters PTY Ltd. And then investors put capital to earn profit from shares, and then the company has legal personality as well as unlimited continuity. And then private companies always is not allowed to sell shares to the public. Then when we look into positives there, shareholders can vote for or appoint the most capable director to manage their company. So shareholders are basically not there on a day-to-day basis for a company. They just come during the annual general meeting, and they also receive what we call interim reports so that they know and learn about the company's performance. Therefore, it means they have to vote or appoint a director. A director will be an individual who oversees the company's operations, and it will be an individual who now gives the company direction and also manage the company on a day-to-day basis. So shareholders can vote for or appoint the most capable director to manage their company. And another positive is that a company has continuity of existence, whether one shareholder passes away or one shareholder withdraws from the company. Doesn't mean the company will stop. It has what we call now a continuity of existence. And then owner has legal identity, and the shareholders have no direct legal implication or limited liability, and it is managed at least by one competent, highly skilled director. Negatives are that it requires a lot of capital for establishment, and large management structures can result in decision making taking time, and then the private company is not allowed to sell shares to the public, and then directors may sometimes act in their own interest and not in the company's best interest. Then we have personal liability company. This personal liability company is very similar to now a private company. The difference is that the directors, remember I explained that directors are the individuals who run the company on a day-to-day basis, and then they are appointed or voted for by the shareholders. So the difference there is that directors of a personal liability company are jointly and severally liable for all debts or liabilities of the company. Why are we talking about that here? Is that, remember, directors run the company on a day-to-day basis. Think about it. If you become now a shareholder, it means now you are not there to see what is happening on your company on a day-to-day basis. So the director takes decisions for you. So if it happens that the business now has liabilities or has debts that were not managed properly, it means the shareholders were not involved, but the individuals who were involved there were the directors, because they were running the company on a day-to-day basis. So with personal liability liability company, it says now, since the directors were the individuals who were running the company on a day-to-day basis, if the company has liabilities or debts, they will be liable to pay those debts as well, because they contributed towards that particular liability or debt because they failed to manage their company in the most appropriate way. This means that directors then will be having unlimited liability. The name of the personal liability company ends with INC, and the name of the private company, remember, ends with PTY Ltd. What are the characteristics there? The company name will end with letters INC, and then directors have unlimited liability, and they are jointly liable for the debts of the business, even if they are no longer or they are out of the office. Furthermore, the memorandum of incorporation should state that this is a personal liability company and they must at least have one director on their board of directors. Note, other characteristics of a personal liability company are same as that of a private company, except the above mentioned two. Then, when we are looking into positives and negatives, the advantages of a personal liability company are same or similar to that of a private company, except when we are looking into the disadvantages. The disadvantages are also the same as of that of the private company, except the idea that the directors of a personal liability company have unlimited liability when it comes to the debts of the business. Now we look into a public company. A public company is now a company that is registered to offer stock and shares to the general public. This is mostly done through the Johannesburg Security or Stock Exchange, meaning the general public can buy shares for companies that we consider to be public companies. Now, the public company is designed for large-scale operations that require large capital investment. When we are looking into the characteristics, a minimum of one person is required to start a public company. The company name ends with letters Ltd, and then shareholders have limited liability and has legal personality and therefore has unlimited continuity. What do we mean by legal personality is that the company on its own is taken as a human being, meaning it has its own debts and has to pay their own debts. Hence, we are saying this is a legal personality or legal persona, and then it requires 3 or more individuals or 3 or more shareholders, 3 or more directors or 3 or more shareholders. Profits are shared in a form of dividends in proportion to the share held, and a prospectus is used to try and attract the public to come and buy shares. What are the positives and negatives there? Advantages are the idea that the business has its own legal identity and can own assets or property in its name, and it is easy now to raise funds for growth through the sale of shares. And remember, shares are sold to the public members because this is a public company, and then shareholders have limited liability for the debt of the company, and shareholders may only lose the amount they have invested because we are talking about limited liability here. Then disadvantages, the business must disclose all financial information which can be used by its competitors, and a large amount of funds are spent on financial audits. And another one is that directors may not be motivated to work very hard because of the shareholders deciding on the director's remuneration. Then when we look into the difference between the private and a public company, the private company may not offer shares to the general public, whereas the public company trades its shares publicly on the Johannesburg Security Exchange. And then private company shares are not freely transferable there, but when you're looking into a public company, shares are freely transferable, meaning it can be sold to another individual. And then a minimum of 1 director is needed for a private company, whereas a minimum of 3 directors are needed for a public company. And the name must end with proprietary limited for a private company, and for a public company the name must end with limited, which is Ltd. And then annual financial statements or financial statements need not to be audited for a private company, whereas for a public company annual financial statements need to be audited and published. Then let us look into an activity. We have 1, 2, 2.1.1, 2.1.2, and 2.1.3. The first one now says explain the difference between limited and unlimited liability. Then 2 has a scenario and an instruction which says now read the scenario below and answer questions that follow. Petra Pty Ltd. Petra Pty Ltd needed a large amount of capital for expansion, and their management decided to convert the company into another type of company so that they would be able to sell shares to the public on JSE. Then 2.1.1, identify the form of ownership Petra Pty Ltd used before they were converted to another type of company, and now motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario, and then explain the characteristics of the form of ownership identified in 2.1.1 and name the form of ownership Petra Pty Ltd has converted to. Now, solution. When you look into the solution there, limited liability, this is when shareholders are only liable for the amount they have invested in the company. Unlimited liability, this is when owners are personally responsible for all the debts of the business. For example, if the business is bankrupt, the personal positions of shareholders cannot be used to pay off the debts of the business when we are looking into limited liability, because the company's debts are not attached to the owner's assets. So it can never be a situation whereby the owner has to sell their assets. But with unlimited, it means now the debts of the business are not limited to the business, but they can move now to the assets of the owner. Hence, we say this is when the owners are personally responsible for all the debts of the business. And then, for example, if the business is declared bankrupt, the personal positions of the sole trader or partners may be sold off or to pay off the debts of the business. So that is how you get your 4 marks there. Then solutions, when you're looking into the scenario, they said now Petra Pty Ltd, and then you're supposed to identify which form of ownership was used before. That was private company because of the name, obviously, Petra Pty Ltd, which needed a large amount of capital for expansion. So the answer was very clear there, because with the name you are able to see which company form of ownership was used by that company before they wanted to convert to a one that would allow them to sell shares to the public. But the question that follows now asks to say which form of ownership is that one. Or before that, we get to 2.1.2, which explains now, looks for explanations of the characteristics of the form of ownership identified in 2.1.1, which is your private company. It says now a minimum of one shareholder, and there is no limit on the number of shareholders. It raises capital by issuing shares to its shareholders, and then shareholders have limited liability, and the company names ends with Pty Ltd. Investors put capital in to earn profit through shares, and then the company has legal personality as well as unlimited continuity, and the private company is not allowed to sell shares to the public, and that's how you get your 6 marks there. And then the name of the company that Petra wanted to be converted to is a public company. Then you get 2 marks for that, because Petra was Pty Ltd, meaning private, and then now public company because they wanted to attract investors. Then we looked into liability, limited liability and unlimited. We also looked into the forms of ownership, explained the meaning, gave characteristics, and also provided positives and negatives. We looked into sole traders, partnership, close cooperation, private company, personal liability company, together with public company. That was our lesson. Remember to study and make sure that you get the best out of yourself. Thank you for watching.